Have you ever met someone who felt like everything you had been searching for, only to end up feeling more confused, anxious, and emotionally exhausted than ever before? Have you ever wondered why some relationships start with so much passion, so much connection, and so much promise, only to slowly turn into a painful game of chasing and running? If that sounds familiar, then what you're about to hear may explain more about your life than you realize. Because this isn't just another relationship story. This isn't simply about bad timing, bad luck, or meeting the wrong person. What if the real reason you feel stuck has nothing to do with finding the right partner? What if the trap you're caught in is much deeper than that? What if there is an invisible pattern running your relationships without you even knowing it? Stay with this video until the end, because by the time we're finished, you'll understand why this cycle feels impossible to escape, why you keep getting pulled back even when you know it's hurting you, and most importantly, how to begin taking your power back. The answer might completely change the way you see your relationships, your emotions, and even yourself. It usually starts the same way. You meet someone and something feels different. The conversations flow naturally. The chemistry is intense. You feel seen. You feel understood. For the first time in a long time, it seems like someone truly gets you. Every text message creates excitement. Every conversation leaves you wanting more. The future starts to look brighter. Possibilities begin forming in your mind. You start imagining what this connection could become. And then, without warning, something changes. The messages become less frequent. The energy shifts. The certainty that once felt so strong begins to disappear. Suddenly, you're left wondering what happened. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze every word. Every silence feels louder than it should. Every delay feels meaningful. Every small change feels like a threat. The strange part is that you can't stop thinking about it. You tell yourself to move on. You tell yourself not to care so much. You tell yourself to focus on your own life, but your mind keeps returning to the same person, the same questions, the same uncertainty, day after day. And that's when the trap begins, because most people believe relationships become painful because there isn't enough love. But often the real problem is something much deeper. The pain comes from the emotional pattern underneath the relationship. A pattern so powerful that it can make intelligent, strong, self-aware people act in ways they never expected. You start checking your phone more often. You start wondering why they seem distant. You start questioning your worth. You start asking yourself whether you said something wrong, whether you asked for too much, whether you're not enough. And while all of this is happening, another part of you knows something isn't right. A part of you knows that healthy love shouldn't leave you feeling constantly anxious. Healthy connection shouldn't feel like a battle for attention. Yet somehow you keep holding on. Why? Because human beings are not driven only by logic. We are driven by emotion. We are driven by fear. We are driven by old wounds that often hide beneath the surface. And sometimes what feels like love is actually a desperate search for certainty, safety, and validation. The human mind has a fascinating tendency. It becomes obsessed with things it cannot fully predict. When something feels uncertain, the brain pays more attention to it. When affection becomes inconsistent, it often becomes more valuable in our minds. The harder something is to hold on to, the more we fear losing it. That is why some relationships can feel impossible to let go of, not because they are making you happy, but because they are keeping you emotionally activated. You find yourself living between hope and disappointment, between closeness and distance, between feeling chosen and feeling rejected. One day, everything feels perfect. The next day, everything feels uncertain. And slowly, without realizing it, your emotional state begins depending on another person's actions. That is one of the most exhausting places a person can live, because your peace disappears, your confidence weakens, your focus shifts away from your goals, your growth, and your future. Instead, your energy becomes consumed by trying to understand someone else's behavior. But here's the truth most people never hear. The pain you're feeling is not proof that you're weak. The confusion you're feeling is not proof that you're broken. And the fact that you keep getting pulled back does not mean you are incapable of moving forward. It means there is a pattern operating beneath the surface, a pattern that millions of people experience without ever recognizing it. And the moment you can finally see the pattern, you stop blaming yourself for every problem. You stop chasing answers in all the wrong places. You begin understanding what is really happening. Because awareness creates power. Understanding creates freedom. And freedom begins the moment you stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And start asking, what is this experience trying to teach me about myself? The answer to that question has the power to change everything. And what you're about to discover next is the hidden dynamic that keeps this cycle alive, even when both people genuinely care about each other. The moment you begin recognizing that this experience is not random, a new question appears. If so many people find themselves caught in the same emotional loop, what makes it so powerful? Why does a connection that causes stress often feel stronger than one that offers peace? Why do people stay attached to situations that drain their energy, cloud their judgment, and leave them emotionally tired? The answer lies in something most people never learn. Many individuals spend years believing they are searching for love, when in reality they are searching for emotional relief. There is a difference. Love helps you grow. Emotional relief helps you escape discomfort. When these two become confused, relationships begin carrying expectations they were never meant to carry. Think about what happens inside the mind during periods of uncertainty. When everything feels stable, attention naturally spreads toward different parts of life. Goals matter, personal growth matters, family matters, purpose matters. But when a relationship becomes unpredictable, something strange occurs. The brain starts treating the connection like an unfinished puzzle. Unfinished puzzles demand attention. The mind hates loose ends. It wants answers. It wants closure. It wants certainty. This is why a healthy and available person may not create the same emotional intensity as someone who sends mixed signals. One creates security. The other creates constant mental activity. And unfortunately, many people mistake mental activity for emotional depth. The more difficult something becomes to understand, the more important it can appear. That is one of the greatest illusions in human psychology. A person begins measuring their value through another person's behavior. If they receive warmth, they feel worthy. If they receive distance, they feel inadequate. Their emotional state rises and falls according to circumstances outside their control. Without realizing it, they hand over the keys to their inner peace. This is where suffering quietly grows. Not because someone else has complete power over them, but because they have forgotten their own. Every human being wants to feel significant. Every human being wants connection. Every human being wants reassurance that they matter. These desires are natural. There is nothing wrong with them. The challenge begins when these needs become dependent on a single source. When that happens, every interaction starts carrying enormous weight. A simple message feels meaningful. A short reply feels alarming. A canceled plan feels personal. Small events begin creating large emotional reactions, and soon reality becomes distorted. Instead of seeing situations clearly, people start viewing everything through the lens of fear. Fear changes perception. Fear creates stories. Fear fills gaps with assumptions. A delayed response becomes evidence of rejection. Silence becomes evidence of disinterest. Space becomes evidence of abandonment. The mind creates explanations long before facts arrive. This happens because the brain is designed to protect, not necessarily to interpret accurately. When uncertainty appears, survival mechanisms activate. The nervous system starts scanning for threats. It searches for danger even when danger may not exist. This process happens so quickly that most people never notice it. They only notice the emotional consequences: restlessness, overthinking, worry, doubt, a constant feeling that something is about to go wrong. The truly painful part is that many people believe these reactions are caused by the other person alone, but the reality is more complex. External events may trigger emotions, yet those emotions often connect to deeper experiences that existed long before the relationship began. Every person carries an invisible emotional history: past disappointments, past heartbreaks, past moments of feeling overlooked, past experiences of loss. These experiences shape expectations in ways that often remain hidden. They influence reactions. They influence decisions. They influence who feels familiar. And familiarity is powerful. The human mind is naturally drawn toward what feels familiar, even when that familiarity creates discomfort. This explains why some individuals repeatedly enter similar situations with different people. The faces change, the stories change, the circumstances change, yet somehow the emotional outcome remains remarkably similar. The pattern survives because it feels known. Known feels safe, even when it hurts. That truth surprises many people. Most assume they are seeking happiness, Yet beneath the surface, people often seek familiarity first. The nervous system chooses what it recognizes before it chooses what is healthy. This is why awareness matters so much. Without awareness, patterns operate automatically. With awareness, patterns become visible, and once something becomes visible, it can no longer control you in the same way. Imagine carrying a map through a maze without realizing it. The map was always there, but you never unfolded it. The maze seemed endless because you could not see the bigger picture. The moment the map opens, confusion begins turning into understanding. That is exactly what happens when someone starts recognizing these emotional dynamics. Suddenly, events that once felt mysterious begin making sense. The emotional highs make sense. The emotional crashes make sense. The obsession makes sense. The exhaustion makes sense. Not because the pain disappears instantly, but because clarity replaces confusion. And clarity is powerful. When people understand what is happening inside themselves, they stop fighting invisible battles. They stop blaming every problem on bad luck. They stop believing they are destined to repeat the same story forever. A new possibility begins to emerge. The possibility that this struggle is not a life sentence. The possibility that these reactions can be understood. The possibility that emotional freedom is not something reserved for other people, because the cycle is not fueled by weakness. It is fueled by unconscious patterns, and patterns can be changed. But before change becomes possible, there is something even more important to understand: the dynamic itself. The invisible push and pull that keeps two people locked in the same exhausting rhythm, each triggering fears inside the other without fully realizing what they are doing. And once you see that dynamic clearly, everything begins to look different. Now that the deeper mechanism is becoming clearer, it is time to look at the force that keeps this entire cycle alive. This is where many people finally understand why their relationships seem to follow the same script over and over again, even when the people involved are completely different. At the center of this pattern are two opposing fears. One person fears losing connection. The other fears losing independence. One seeks closeness when emotional tension appears. The other seeks distance when emotional intensity increases. Neither person usually plans this. Neither wakes up in the morning hoping to create conflict. Yet without realizing it, they become trapped in a dynamic that keeps activating the very fears they are trying to avoid. It often begins beautifully. There is attraction, there is excitement, there is emotional energy, everything seems natural. The connection develops quickly because both individuals are receiving something they deeply crave. One experiences attention, affection, and emotional engagement. The other experiences admiration, acceptance, and companionship without feeling trapped. For a brief period, everything feels balanced. Then the relationship starts moving beyond the early stage. Expectations slowly increase. Emotional investment grows. The possibility of real commitment becomes more visible. This is where hidden fears begin stepping forward. The person who depends heavily on emotional closeness starts wanting more reassurance. Not because they are demanding by nature, but because deeper feelings create deeper vulnerability. The relationship becomes important. The stakes become higher. The possibility of loss becomes more frightening. At the same time, the partner who values personal space begins sensing pressure. Nothing dramatic may have happened. No major argument may have occurred. Yet internally, they start feeling restricted. They begin worrying about expectations, obligations, or the possibility of losing control over their own lives. This creates the first shift. One person moves closer. The other moves backward. The closer one moves, the more pressure the second person feels. The more distance appears, the more urgency develops in the first person. Without realizing it, both people are reacting to fear rather than responding to reality. That distinction matters. Fear rarely asks what is actually happening. Fear reacts to what might happen, and when two different fears collide, confusion follows. The individual seeking connection starts asking questions. Why have things changed? Why does the energy feel different? Why do they seem less available? Why does it feel like they are slipping away? Meanwhile, the other person begins having completely different thoughts. Why is everything becoming so serious? Why can't things stay simple? Why do I feel overwhelmed? Why do I suddenly want more room to breathe? Notice what is happening. Both people are experiencing discomfort. Both people are struggling. Both people feel misunderstood. Yet neither fully understands the inner world of the other. One interprets distance as rejection. The other interprets pursuit as pressure. And because each person is focused on their own emotional experience, they rarely recognize the fear operating beneath the other person's behavior. This is why conversations often become frustrating. One person asks for more connection. The other asks for more freedom. Neither request sounds unreasonable on its own. The problem is that each request unintentionally triggers the other person's deepest insecurity. The more reassurance one person seeks, the more trapped the other may feel. The more freedom the second person seeks, the more abandoned the first may feel. The cycle feeds itself. A reaction creates another reaction. A defensive response creates another defensive response. Small misunderstandings grow into larger emotional struggles. What makes this pattern particularly painful is that genuine feelings often exist on both sides. Many people assume these situations happen because one person cares while the other does not. Reality is often far more complicated. Sometimes both people care deeply. Sometimes both want the relationship to succeed. Sometimes both are hurting. Yet caring alone cannot solve patterns that remain unconscious. Emotions without awareness often create repetition. That is why many couples spend months or even years moving through the same arguments. Different details, same emotional outcome. The conversation changes. The underlying pattern stays the same. One person feels unseen. The other feels controlled. One feels neglected. The other feels suffocated. Neither achieves what they truly want, because beneath every complaint lies a deeper need: the desire for safety, the desire for acceptance, the desire to feel valued without sacrificing authenticity. Every human being carries these needs. The challenge appears when fear becomes the primary strategy for protecting them. Fear creates behaviors that push people further from what they actually desire. Someone wants closeness, so they cling tighter. Someone wants freedom, so they withdraw further. Both strategies feel protective in the moment, yet both often produce the opposite result. The person seeking connection ends up feeling more disconnected. The person seeking space ends up feeling increasingly isolated, and slowly, frustration replaces understanding. This is where many relationships reach a crossroads. Some continue repeating the cycle indefinitely. Others collapse under the weight of constant emotional tension. A smaller number begin recognizing what is truly happening beneath the surface. That recognition changes everything, because once people understand that they are not fighting each other but reacting to hidden fears, a different perspective becomes possible. The problem stops being about winning. The problem stops being about blame. The focus shifts toward understanding. Understanding creates options. Without understanding, people stay trapped inside automatic reactions. With understanding, they gain the ability to choose different responses. That is where transformation begins. Not when another person changes first, not when circumstances become perfect, but when awareness becomes stronger than old conditioning. And before that transformation can happen, there is one side of this dynamic that deserves closer attention. The side that spends countless nights questioning, worrying, hoping, and searching for reassurance. Because to truly understand this cycle, you must first understand the silent struggle taking place inside the person who fears losing the connection most.